Have you ever wondered why the world's most powerful spiritual moment happened not in a palace nor a temple, but at a lonely well under the burning midday sun? Imagine a scandalized outcast, shunned by her own people, meeting a Jewish stranger who dares to speak her name. Two worlds, light and shadow, collide in a single conversation. But why? Why did Jesus choose her when everyone else avoided her gaze? The reality behind this encounter is a mystery woven between shame and redemption, thirst and living water. Most readers overlook what truly happened here. Few understand the profound invitation hidden in their quiet exchange. What if this story isn't just about the woman, but about you, your secret longings, and your hidden pain? Today, you'll discover the deepest secret behind this meeting, and why the living water Jesus offered her still flows for those desperate for hope. Prepare to see your own reflection at the well. Feel the tension, sense the promise, glimpse the living water offered in the midst of your dryness. Keep watching, because the truth behind the woman at the well just might change everything you believe about grace, love, and your own worth. Picture the sun mercilessly beating down on the stones of ancient Samaria, shadows shrinking in the midday heat, the hour when most souls seek shade and secrecy is at its thinnest. Against this backdrop unfolds a scene so ordinary, so quietly human, that it almost escapes notice. A Jewish traveler seated, parched and dusty, at the edge of an old well. But hidden beneath this apparent ordinariness is a spiritual mystery so deep, it humbles kings and confounds the wise. You may have heard of Jacob's well, dug in the days when patriarchs wandered, and each scoop of water brimming with promise. Jacob gave this well to his son Joseph, John's Gospel whispers, as if passing down the keys to a long-sealed door. Today, the well's ancient stones, silent, immovable, bear witness to a conversation no one expected. In this setting, a woman draws near, not in the cool hush of morning, but at high noon, when her footsteps expose more than thirst, they betray exile. She comes alone, carrying an earthen jar, and far weightier burdens invisible to every eye but one. Pause here. Why did John the Evangelist choose to highlight this moment? Why such care with historical detail, the 6th hour, the site near the field Jacob gave to Joseph? You might be wondering, does it really matter where and when this happens? Let's peel back the surface. Samaria, centuries before Jesus, was a place split by wounds as old as civil war. Once brothers, Jews and Samaritans became rivals, divided by land, by worship, by centuries of bitter suspicion. The well itself was a silent battleground. Both peoples claimed its legacy, its promise, its belonging. Here is where the drama intensifies. In ancient Israel, wells weren't just watering holes. They were the very heart of life and legend, a place where promises were made and destinies revealed. Abraham's flocks drank here. Rachel met Jacob at a well, and destinies shifted between drops of water and shared thirsts. Think of the well as the crossroad of survival and hope. And yet, for all their sacred ancestry, Samaritans and Jews agreed on almost nothing else. Their religious practices, the mountain of worship, Mount Gerizim for Samaritans, Jerusalem for Jews, stood as twin peaks of defiance, splitting faith into rival altars. Most Jews avoided Samaria entirely, even taking days out of their journey just to skirt its territory. To travel through Samaria was to enter a silent, aching wound in the nation's heart. So when John writes, he had to pass through Samaria, he's not just marking a route, but hinting at something unavoidable, almost fateful. Was it necessity, or something orchestrated by heaven? Here's where the ordinary explodes. Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, chooses to wait, not rush, at the very place of division, when no one else would be near. Most women came to the well at dawn, laughing, sharing stories, blending hope with water. But this woman slips in at noon, drawn by the scorching sun and the desire to avoid every condemning glance. Now imagine the tension. A lone woman of dubious reputation, bearing wounds deeper than the well, meets a Jewish man who, by all accounts, should never speak to her. Don't miss the layers here. Gender, ethnicity, theology, history, each a wall, high and insurmountable, each reason enough for silence. But then comes the first revelation, quiet as a heartbeat. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." John 4:7. It's 8 simple words, but they break centuries of silence. The very act, asking for a drink, defies custom, expectation, and fear. A rabbi speaking to a woman, a Jew speaking to a Samaritan, the pure becoming vulnerable to the rejected. With a single question, Jesus tears apart the script handed down for generations. You might wonder, why would he risk scandal for a sip of water? Why break rules so sharply etched in the culture? Here's where the biblical foundation deepens into mystery. Throughout the Old Testament, God meets people at wells, at moments of critical destiny. Think again of Jacob, Rachel, and the promise that would shape a nation. Jesus' request for water is more than a plea for refreshment. It is an echo of every divine encounter where the ordinary conceals the miraculous. This shows us something profound about the way God operates. He doesn't wait for the perfect setting or the worthy vessel. Instead, he chooses the wounded, the overlooked, the ones who come at noon with their shame and silence. In that small act, "Give me a drink," the ancient story shifts. What once was a site of division becomes the threshold of reconciliation. But here, the tension grows. The woman is startled, questioning, almost defensive. "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" John 4:9. Embedded in her words is the centuries-old ache of rejection, suspicion. She knows the lines she's not supposed to cross. Yet even as the scene simmers with unspoken history, a new question erupts. What is Jesus really asking for? Is it just water, or is this a deeper well he wants to draw from? But before we answer that, consider this. The very first words Jesus utters in this encounter are an invitation. Not a lecture, not a condemnation, but a request inviting her to give what little she has. In that ask is an implicit honoring, a lifting up of the discarded, the promise that no vessel is too broken to carry living water. At this point, most tales would falter, but here the suspense only tightens. The woman, jar in hand, stands poised between worlds, her story, the history of her people, and the mysterious stranger who refuses to treat her as everyone else does. You might feel the weight of this moment, her heart racing, mind clouded with questions. Picture the bright glare, the sweat on her brow, the cool promise of water just within reach, and yet something so much greater shimmering just behind the ordinary. But this isn't the climax, only the opening of a deeper mystery. What happens next not only redefines identity, culture, and worship, but upends what we believe about who is worthy to approach the sacred. As we stand with her, our hands dusty with the same longing, our stories marked by their own noonday shames, we have to ask, why did Jesus choose this well, this woman, this hour? And what ancient promise was he about to awaken? What you're about to discover in the next part will completely change your perspective on spiritual thirst, because the true meaning of living water is far more breathtaking and more personal than we ever imagined. Imagine the hush that surrounds an unexpected question, a silence you can almost feel, thick with meaning, trembling on the edge of revelation. As the woman at the well stands before Jesus, jar in hand, the air vibrates with more than midday heat. In that moment, centuries of spiritual tension, a tangle of shame, tradition, and longing, are drawn tight, ready to snap. But Jesus doesn't press her. He invites her deeper, pulling her gently toward a spiritual reality no one else has dared to reveal in this place of division. "If you knew the gift of God," he answers, "and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." John 4:10. Let that statement echo in your mind. What is the gift of God? What could living water possibly mean, offered by a thirsty, dusty wanderer at an ancient well? Pause, because at this opening, the ordinary begins to shimmer with the promise of something otherworldly. You might be wondering, as she did, is this a parable, a riddle, a hidden code meant only for the spiritual elite? Or is it an invitation open to everyone, even and especially to the outcast? The woman, still anchored in the world of jugs and ancient stones, cannot imagine a water more real than what can be drawn up with aching arms. "Sir," she says, "you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water?" John 4:11. Notice how the echo of her physical longing hides an even greater thirst, a question that exposes the gap between spiritual reality and human limitation. Here Jesus begins to pull back yet another veil, ushering her into a new realm of understanding. "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." John 4:13-14. What a dramatic contrast! Many believe satisfaction comes from what we can see, touch, or seize. But the profound truth is this: the soul's truest thirst cannot be quenched by anything drawn from the world's deepest wells. The pattern of emptiness and longing repeats, generation after generation, until someone breaks the cycle. But how is this possible? How can a simple conversation at a forgotten well become the doorway to eternity? This is where spiritual insight cracks open the stone of tradition. In the language of the Hebrew scriptures, living water was more than a metaphor. It meant water moving, flowing, fresh from a spring, never stagnant. God himself in Jeremiah 2:13 cries out against his people, "They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water." What a chilling indictment! The people have traded intimate connection with the source for artificial storage tanks, man-made systems carried by ritual but ultimately empty. The woman at the well, with her heavy jar, becomes the living symbol of the world's aching quest, always drawing, always returning, always thirsty. Now imagine Jesus stands as the very source she's never dared hope for. Every failed relationship, every trip to the well, every secret wish for acceptance, their weight presses on her soul. But he is offering something different. Not a temporary fix, but the wellspring itself. And here's the theological thunderbolt. The gift of God, the living water, isn't just doctrine or philosophy. It is God's very life, poured out through Christ, capable of bubbling up inside broken vessels, turning places of shame into fountains of hope. The woman, not yet understanding but gripped by longing, pleads, "Sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." John 4:15. She is caught between confusion and desire, unable to name what she wants, yet certain that she needs it. This shows us something profound about the human soul. Beneath every surface, longing is a deeper cry for meaning, connection, and healing. Jesus doesn't rush her confession. Instead, he turns the key in the lock of her heart. "Go call your husband and come here," John 4:16. The shock cuts through the conversation like lightning. In one simple request, Jesus exposes the ache beneath her days, the story she hoped to keep hidden even at the noonday well. "I have no husband," she responds, her voice tight with decades of pain and disappointment. But Jesus allows no shameful shadows to linger. "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. John 4:17-18. Pause, feel the hush, the unbearable vulnerability. Many believe that God meets us only in our strength, our victories, our measured piety, but the profound truth is, He meets us precisely where we've failed, where we are empty, where we most want to hide. Here is a glimpse into God's heart, a heart that sees through every mask, yet refuses to condemn. Jesus reveals her truth not to shame, but to liberate. In this moment of piercing honesty, He answers her real thirst, the ache for acceptance, the craving for love unsullied by judgment. You might be feeling the tension now, the spiritual nakedness of being truly known, yet fully invited to receive. She tries, like so many of us, to change the subject, to push the conversation out of her pain and back into the safety of religious debate. Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. John 4:19-20. With a swirl of ancient arguments, she seeks distance, protection. But Jesus, with breathtaking tenderness, lifts her gaze beyond geography and tradition. Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. John 4:21-23. What happened next changed everything. In a single sentence, Jesus upends centuries of religious division. The sacred space is not a mountain or a temple, but the heart open to spirit and truth. Not the rituals or locations, but living connection with the Father. This is a spiritual earthquake. Listen with your heart. The boundaries that kept her and us on the outside, looking in, are erased. The Father's longing is not for perfect ritual, but for worship that flows from the depths of an honest, thirsty spirit. But the conversation's crescendo is yet to come. In a trembling voice, the woman utters the hope of generations. I know that Messiah is coming. When He comes, He will tell us all things. John 4:25. And then, like sunlight breaking through every cloud, Jesus answers with a directness found nowhere else in the Gospels. I who speak to you am He. John 4:26. Imagine standing in her sandals, your hidden story laid bare, your questions met with promise, and then this, the Messiah right there, speaking personally, offering living water to the thirstiest heart. This is the turning point of the universe, hidden at a lonely well. The first person to whom Jesus openly reveals His identity is not a king, priest, or disciple, but a rejected woman, haunted by her past. Here, theology becomes an encounter. Grace and truth, once distant ideas, now take form, inviting you to lay down your heavy jar, to drink from the fountain that never runs dry. But this revelation raises an even deeper question. If the living water is offered so freely, what happens when a shamed soul finally dares to drink? What ripple does this moment send through the boundaries of society, spirituality, and the very fabric of destiny? In the next part, you'll see how this ancient meeting explodes into the modern world, and how the power of living water overflows beyond one woman's story, offering hope and transformation for every thirsty heart today. Imagine for a moment that you are carrying your own jar, a vessel shaped by years of disappointment, regret, and secret longing. Day after day you return to old wells, ambition, relationships, approval, pleasure. Each promises relief. Yet by evening the jar is empty again, and your soul aches with a thirst nothing external seems able to quench. The scene at Jacob's well is not just an ancient memory. It is the story repeating itself in the heart of every human being, right now, in this very moment. The woman at the well is more than a figure from history. She is a mirror, revealing our restless quest for something permanent in a world of shifting sands. Many believe that spiritual thirst was a problem for people in biblical times. But the profound truth is, our hunger for significance, love, and connection is as insatiable now as it was beneath the blazing Sumerian sun. Modern life, for all its advances, has mastered the art of distraction but not satisfaction. We fill our days with noise, digital interactions, purchases and plans. But when the noise fades and the screens go dark, the emptiness gnaws deeper. You might be wondering, what does a dusty well in first-century Samaria have to do with overflowing inboxes, frenzied social feeds, or late-night loneliness today? Let's bring this ancient story into the pulse of modern life. Think of the well as every place you return to for fulfillment. For some, it's the relentless drive for success, receiving one promotion only to feel the need for another. For others, it's scrolling endlessly, hoping that one notification or like will tip the balance from insignificance to affirmation. Still others sip from wells of habit, addiction, or ever-new relationships, only to discover the aftertaste of emptiness. Now imagine someone stepping into your daily routine at the hour of greatest isolation, the moment when your soul's thirst is most exposed. What if, in the glare of your most public failures or private exhaustion, someone spoke not to your surface, but straight to your soul as Jesus did to the woman? What if, instead of condemnation, he offered pure acceptance and living water, a satisfaction that grows deeper the longer you linger in his presence? This is not theoretical. The living water Jesus promised isn't an idea preserved in the amber of Scripture. It is a reality that breaks into the ordinary, right here, right now. Across the centuries, countless lives have been transformed by drinking from this stream. Consider Maria, a high-powered executive whose days were measured in achievements, but whose nights ached with anxiety. Her well was accomplishment, her jar the titles and trophies she collected. But the more she achieved, the less satisfied she became. It was only when a friend invited her to pause in silence to bring her emptiness honestly before God that something broke. In a quiet moment, no lightning, no spectacle, she sensed a gentle voice, saying, "You are enough because I love you." Tears fell, and for the first time, peace bubbled up like a wellspring within her. Maria's story echoes that of the Samaritan woman, as a jar of expectations was replaced by a fountain of grace. Or listen to Tom, a soldier returned from war, haunted by memories and mistakes he could not shake. His well was numbness, alcohol, late nights, detachment. Yet during a support group, he encountered the message of Jesus' living water. What stunned him wasn't the demand to be better, but the invitation to be known and loved in the midst of brokenness. "You don't have to keep coming back here," he read in John 4, the words alive in his darkness. "Let me be your source." Tom's healing didn't come overnight, but slowly his thirst was met by hope, a hope that, like living water, refused to dry up. This shows us something profound about the story's real-world power. Living water isn't about escaping life's demands. It is about discovering a source within you, gifted by God, that steadily fills even as what's outside crumbles. Jesus' words, "Whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again." John 4:14. Shift the focus from what we can get to what God longs to give. But there's another dramatic contrast we must not miss. Many believe spiritual contentment is reserved for the religious, the disciplined, the outwardly righteous. Yet at the well, Jesus ignores the crowd's expectations. He chooses the wrong person on purpose, a Samaritan, a woman, an outcast. The stunning truth? The gifts of God are not rationed according to background, achievement, or pedigree. The living water is offered first to the thirsty, regardless of where their thirst has taken them. What does this mean for you? Think of the moments in your own story when shame, failure, or social exclusion have sent you hiding at noonday, drawing water alone. Hear the echo of Jesus' voice. If you knew the gift of God, imagine feeling the weight of this truth. Your life does not have to be defined by the things you pursue, the approval you crave, or even the regret you carry. There is a new source, ready and waiting, flowing precisely where emptiness has dug its deepest trenches. And the story doesn't stop with private satisfaction. Living water is not stagnant, it overflows. Let's glimpse a few modern well encounters. In an inner-city neighborhood, a group of recovering addicts gathers weekly. Instead of hiding their wounds, they confess them, supporting one another. The well is no longer a place of isolation, but community. One member says, "I come thirsty, but together we drink living water." Across the globe, a teenager wrestling with family conflict stumbles across John 4 on her phone. Alone in a crowded city, she reads Jesus' words, "The Father is seeking such people to worship him," and feels for the first time seen by God. On the margins of society, a man imprisoned for years finds a chaplain's eyes meeting his without judgment. Their shared prayers open up a space where living water gently washes away resentment and fear. What unites these stories? The transformation begins not by moving to a better well, but by allowing the living water to flow within. As it did for the Samaritan woman, the encounter flips the script. The jar no longer defines the story. The past does not set the limit for what comes next. But now, the narrative takes an unexpected turn. Perhaps you, watching this, wonder, can living water truly overflow from my wounds, my disappointments, my story into the lives of others? After all, the Samaritan woman's transformation rippled out, reaching her entire community. Pause here. The pattern is vital. When she receives living water, she is compelled to run into the town, the very place that scorned her, and cry out, "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" John 4:29. Her shame becomes her testimony. Her wounds become the windows through which others glimpse hope. This is more than ancient drama. It is the rhythm of every true encounter with Jesus. Living water is never meant to stagnate within us. It overflows. Modern stories mirror this truth. The greatest transformations often begin with the most broken, overlooked hearts discovering wholeness and then sharing their hope. This shows us something profound about spiritual contagion. The thirst of one soul can become the refreshment of many. And the first taste of living water doesn't require spiritual perfection, just an honest heart, willing to let go of the jar and receive heaven's gift. Yet as powerful as this cycle may be, a deeper mystery remains. How does living water reshape communities, generations, even our future destinies? What prophetic currents started at Jacob's well still flow through our divided and thirsty world? What you're about to uncover in the next part will forever change your view of spiritual impact, destiny, and the ongoing story written by every encounter with living water. The ripple has only just begun. Are you ready to see how far it will reach? Beneath the sun-scorched silence of Jacob's well, something was set in motion, an undercurrent invisible to the eyes of the ancient world, yet destined to surge across centuries and continents. The conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman marks not only a radical moment of grace, but the cracking open of prophecy, the release of spiritual waters meant to reshape the landscape of history. Prophetic encounters are rarely what we expect. Many believe prophecies must unfold in thunderous visions or grand proclamations. Yet the most profound fulfillments often happen in quiet moments, under ordinary circumstances, far from the gaze of power. The profound truth is that Jacob's well becomes, in Jesus' hands, a portal where past, present, and future collide. Pause and let this scene expand in your mind's eye. Two outcasts by the world's standards, a marginalized woman, a Messiah shrouded in Galilean ordinariness, meet at the borderland of religious hostility. But hidden within their exchange is a current carrying the hopes not just of Samaria and Judea, but of all humanity. Let's revisit Jesus' explosive answer. The hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. John 4:23. You might be wondering why the hour is coming and is now here, why such urgency and paradox in a single breath. Here the tension warps time itself. Christ's words ripple with prophetic layers. The now drips with immediacy. This very moment, the walls dividing Jew from Samaritan, man from woman, shame from hope, are crumbling. Yet the hour also looks futureward, promising a new era where God's presence will pour beyond every old boundary. This intersection of now and not yet is the very heartbeat of prophecy. Theologians call this the already and not yet tension of the kingdom. The living water offered here at the well is both a present reality and a future promise, always arriving, ever beckoning. But the reverberations go deeper. To stand at that well is to hear echoes of Ezekiel, where God envisions rivers of living water springing from his temple, bringing life to every barren place. Wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be many fish. For this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh, so everything will live where the river goes. Ezekiel 47:9. Jesus' proclamation transforms the geography of God's presence. No longer fixed to a mountaintop or temple court, the river breaks out. Now the true temple is the heart awakened by spirit and truth. The implications are staggering. What started as a trickle at Jacob's well is the initial gush of the river Ezekiel foresaw, which someday will renew all creation. The woman, stunned by her encounter, drops her jar. Did she realize this act mirrored the prophetic promise? The jar, a vessel for yesterday's efforts, symbolizing cycles of shame and need, is left behind. As the prophetic water starts to flow, yesterday's burdens fall away. This shows us something profound about God's movements in history. The most significant changes often begin in the secret places, the overlooked conversations, the sudden drop of an old jar. But the prophecy unleashed at this well doesn't end with the woman's personal transformation. Hear her words as she runs into the town. "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" John 4:29. At that moment, the message jumps the boundaries that ancient hatred had enforced for centuries. She becomes a harbinger, a prophetic witness, drawing her village to the one who promised not just hope for Israel, but for every tribe and nation. Here's the divine twist. Jesus' living water, extended openly through a Samaritan woman, prefigures the later explosion of the gospel to Gentiles, outsiders, the nations. The apostles, who will later be shocked to find the Holy Spirit poured out even on the Gentiles, Acts 10:45, are already seeing the first drops of that deluge traced in the trail of one woman's testimony. You might feel the prophetic electricity pulsing beneath the surface. The Spirit is being released beyond borders, beyond the old order, fulfilling what the prophets only glimpsed. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Habakkuk 2:14. The living water, once guarded by walls of tradition and prejudice, is now on the loose. But what does this mean for the future? We stand in an era more divided than ever, cultures clashing, communities fractured, even churches split on the very boundaries Jesus came to erase. Yet the same prophetic water flows, quietly but relentlessly, wearing down barriers, eroding division, seeking the lowest, driest places to resurrect. Imagine what could happen if a new generation discovered that worship is not a matter of style or structure, but of spirit and truth, alive in every hungry heart. What rivers could flow when the jars of fear, pride, and judgment are dropped for the sake of divine encounter? Picture cities, families, and faith communities becoming wells of reconciliation and hope, microcosms of prophecy fulfilled, revealing that God still seeks those who will. Allow His presence to bubble up unstoppable within. And yet, the promise surges further still. Revelation's vision brings the story full circle. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Revelation 22:1. The living water that began as a whisper at the well is destined to become a flood, transforming the cosmos, quenching every last thirst for all eternity. What would it mean if your story, your private thirst, your hidden noonday moments, are not merely isolated struggles, but prophecies in miniature? What if Jesus' invitation at the well is still the hinge that swings open the future, not just for you, but for your world, your era, your legacy? This is the mystery you now face. Every time someone receives the living water, the prophecy moves closer to fulfillment. Every act of true worship, every barrier overcome by grace, every testimony from once rejected lips sends new ripples into the stream of divine history. But all prophetic promise demands a response. The woman ran to her people, jarless, fearless, overflowing. How will you carry the living water forward? What future will you write with the rivers God wants to unleash through your surrendered life? The answer cannot be found on ancient pages alone, for the well is here and the hour is now. Yet a question shimmers just beneath the surface. Can the living water truly deepen, connect, and renew not only destinies and nations, but your own inner life? How does the stream become a source that transforms your innermost being, relationships, and daily existence? What's revealed next will show how this ancient encounter sparks a radical ongoing transformation of soul, one that is available to you right now if you dare to taste and see. The river is rising. Will you step in? Let's return once more to the shimmering heat around Jacob's well. The first shockwaves of that encounter have now rippled outward, across centuries, through prophecies, into the world's parched hopes. Yet, a deeper mystery begins to unfold right in the center of your own soul. The story draws us closer, beckoning us not just to witness the river, but to be swept up in its flow, to experience firsthand the deepening of spiritual connections that Jesus offers at the well. Many believe that spiritual intimacy is reserved for saints, mystics, or those set apart by special revelation. But the profound truth shining from this moment is the very opposite. Genuine connection with God is not distant, rare, or hidden away behind curtains of ritual. It is as near as the thirst in your heart and as immediate as a whisper in the noonday stillness. Picture the Samaritan woman's journey, step by trembling step. Shame and isolation had been her closest companions, yet in Jesus' presence they dissolve. Why? Because her encounter was not rooted in performance, pedigree, or posture. It began in honesty, raw and naked. I have no husband. John 4:17. It was in the confession of her brokenness that the door to living water swung open. This shows us something profound about spiritual connection. God meets us where we are most real, not where we pretend to be strong. Imagine the relief, the heavy jar of secrecy and self-protection finally set down, replaced by a current that floods the soul with belonging. Deep spiritual intimacy does not begin with outward achievement, but with inward truth. But the journey does not stop with that first taste. Spiritual connection with Christ, like any deep relationship, grows in layers. At first, living water soothes the raw ache of the soul. Then it seeps into hidden places, carving out channels of grace in the bedrock of your heart. As Jesus said, "The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." John 4:14. Notice the transformation. The well is no longer something outside, something we visit only in moments of desperation. It becomes a spring within, unceasing, fresh, untamable. Spiritual connection thus shifts from a series of occasional encounters to a living, daily immersion in the presence of God. You might be wondering, how can I experience this kind of abiding life with God? What does it look like for spiritual water to well up inside me, reshaping even my ordinary moments? Imagine the texture of such a life. Morning light streams through the window, and you pause, not to perform, but to open your soul. God, here is my emptiness. Let your water flow. In the chaos of midday demands, you stop, breathe, and sense the quiet, unwavering current of God's nearness. In the silent hours of regret or longing, you don't hide. You let honesty draw you back to the source, trusting that shame is no match for the one who knows and loves you through and through. This is the practice of spiritual transparency, becoming a vessel so open, so unguarded, that living water shapes the contours of your days. Instead of clutching your jar of control, you open your hands, vulnerable, receptive, expectant. Let's ground this in a real-world rhythm. Consider Maya, a teacher whose life was defined by service, yet strained by spiritual drought. For years, prayer felt like shouting into an empty room. But as she studied the story of the woman at the well, something shifted. She began her mornings by simply sitting, inviting God to touch her hidden thirst. She whispered honest confessions, sat in silence, listening. Over time, moments of presence grew. A sudden peace in the classroom, courage to forgive a friend, joy bubbling up without explanation. Maya's well was no longer bone dry. A spring had awakened within. You might ask, is this kind of connection sustainable? Can living water endure life's bitter interruptions, the betrayals, the losses, the days when faith feels hollow? Jesus' encounter with the woman hints at an answer. By meeting her at the well, in vulnerability, mess, and disappointment, he reveals that living water is never threatened by the desert. In fact, it flows best through places abandoned by hope. "For I will pour water on the thirsty land and streams on the dry ground," God promises through Isaiah 44:3. This is no shallow trickle, but a flood capable of transforming drought into garden. But something even more beautiful happens as connection with the source deepens. Spiritual water does not stay within. It seeks out other dry places, hearts, homes, communities, creating new networks of grace. Tara, an artist, found that the more she let God's love soften her private wounds, the more compassion she had for her estranged family. Forgiveness that once seemed impossible began to flow, first as a trickle, then as a river, restoring fractured bonds. This expansion is not accidental but essential. As Jesus told the woman, the Father longs for those who worship in spirit and truth, not just in sacred places, but in the open wilderness of the heart. And, through that heart, the world. Living water, once rooted, cannot help but overflow. Imagine the spiritual geometry of this overflow, lines of connection arcing out from your life, intersecting with neighbors, co-workers, even strangers. Living water births a shared well, honest prayer with a struggling friend, hospitality extended to a stranger, comfort flowing to someone on the brink. Each becomes a tributary of the river begun at Jacob's well. This shows us something transformative about spiritual connection. It is never meant to terminate in personal comfort. The deeper you go, the wider you reach. Solitude with God blossoms into solidarity with others. The river of the Spirit, by its very nature, seeks to multiply, to deepen not just your well, but the wells around you. But don't miss the paradox. Many search for deeper connection by accumulating knowledge or chasing emotional highs, hoping to engineer the river by force of will. Yet the secret is surrender, letting go, dropping every jar, and trusting the hidden spring within. The most profound connection is not the result of striving, but the gift of unguarded presence, received and shared. You might be feeling the gentle invitation even now, a stirring, a longing, the subtle pressure of living water at the walls of your soul. What would it mean to let it flow? To become not just a seeker at the well, but a bearer of the river. Pause and let the question descend. What if your story, like the woman's, became the entry point for God's presence to reach others, a living proof that the well has never run dry? And yet the journey goes deeper still. For every river there is a source, for every encounter a next step. How do you move beyond longing for living water to practicing its flow in daily life, in moments both mundane and miraculous? In the next part, you'll discover practical steps to nurture and expand this wellspring, transforming thirst into wisdom, routine into miracle, and longing into a stream of relentless everyday grace. Can the next drop of living water change the way you live, love, and serve? Starting today, get ready, because the river is about to rise in the details of your life. Imagine standing at your own well, a place shaped by routine, need, repetition. You've heard of living water. You've tasted its first sweetness. But how do you nurture that flow so it becomes a spring within, not a fleeting trickle lost to the dust of daily life? With hearts still echoing the story of the woman at the well, we now step into the realm of practice, where spiritual thirst is transformed, drop by drop, into a stream of growth, grace, and persistent hope. Many believe that lasting spiritual change is the result of a single dramatic encounter, but the profound truth revealed at Jacob's well is subtler, deeper. Enduring transformation comes through consistent, practical steps that turn ordinary days into sites of continual renewal. Let's return to the woman's story, but see it as a model for our own journey. She starts isolated and thirsty, then meets Jesus, experiences revelation, receives living water, and runs to tell others. But what happens after the well? How do we keep living water bubbling up, even as old routines try to draw us back to dryness? First, recognize the power of honest presence. Jesus transformed a mundane task, drawing water, into a moment of encounter. What if your daily routines could become holy ground? Begin by anchoring your day with sacred pauses. A few minutes of quiet before you check your phone, a whispered prayer as you brush your teeth, a mental, "Here I am, Lord," as you enter your workplace or school. These small moments invite the Spirit into the ordinariness of life, turning your hours into a vessel for living water. You might be wondering, can it really be that simple? Isn't spiritual depth reserved for those with endless time or special gifts? The lesson of the well is that God meets us in the midst of busyness, not apart from it. Living water doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It flows wherever a heart makes room. Next, cultivate spiritual honesty. The woman's breakthrough came not through flawless performance, but through vulnerable truth-telling. I have no husband. Take time each week or even each day for honest inventory. Where are you thirsty, tired, ashamed, or hungry? Pour it out in prayer, even if the words sound raw or unfinished. Remember Psalm 62:8. Pour out your hearts before him. God is a refuge for us. Imagine the relief as burdens hidden for years are gently emptied before one who already knows and loves you. But don't journey alone. The miracle of living water is multiplied in community. After her encounter, the woman runs to share the news. Her story becomes a ripple that draws others to Jesus. Join a small group, prayer circle, or faith community, even if it feels risky at first. Share your questions, struggles, and small celebrations. Let your journey mingle with others. As Ecclesiastes 4:9 declares, two are better than one, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. In honest community, dryness is shared and refreshment multiplies. Now integrate rhythms of receiving and releasing. Living water is never stagnant. It's designed to overflow. Balance times of soaking in God's presence, worship, reflection, scripture, silence, with intentional acts of serving others. The Samaritan woman immediately turned her new joy outward. Who in your world might need a cup of encouragement, listening, or simple kindness today? Sometimes your own spirit is refreshed most powerfully when you pour out what you've received. Yet spiritual growth is not always easy or linear. There will be days when the well feels dry and the routine exhausting. In these moments, remember the words of Isaiah 58:11. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. Hold fast. Even deserts can bloom when faith is rooted, not in feelings, but in promise and perseverance. Let's make this living water visible with practical everyday steps. Sometimes you might doubt if such simple steps can shift the deep patterns of your heart. But here's the mystery. Spiritual growth is more like digging a well than striking a fountain. Each gesture, each moment of honesty, each act of kindness carves out room for the water to rise. Step by step, drip by drip, the living water transforms the shape of your soul. This shows us something deeply hopeful, the power of little wells. You don't have to become a river overnight. You start as you are, wherever you are. It is God's presence that turns emptiness into a spring, not your effort alone. And as living water flows, it brings surprising fruit, peace that anchors anxiety, wisdom where there once was confusion, compassion instead of judgment, courage replacing shame. Over time, your life quietly testifies, whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. John 4:14. But the journey is not yet finished. Every spiritual step awakens deeper longing, a thirst not just for your own soul, but for the bonds that unite hearts, families, communities. If the well begins with you, how can it flow outward into relationships, forging a fellowship of living water in a world desperate for connection and hope? In the next part, you'll see how shared spiritual encounters, moments of grace woven person to person, can turn loneliness into belonging, difference into unity, and one life's transformation into a surge of living water for many. What happens when you're not just a receiver but a catalyst, drawing others to the well? The answer might just change your vision for community and for your own destiny. Stay with me, because the river's next turn is even more extraordinary. Return again to the well, but this time listen not just to the heartbeat of one woman's encounter, but to the echoing footsteps that soon follow. Sandaled feet rush across sun-baked ground. Curious voices rise from shadows as an entire village crowds around the site once defined by shame and solitude. A moment of private revelation becomes a movement of shared transformation. This is the seldom-seen miracle at the heart of the story. Living water does not pool in private wells. It surges outward, flooding parched relationships, communities, and generations. Many believe faith is an individual journey, a solitary path toward personal fulfillment or peace, but the profound truth radiating from Jacob's well is that God's gifts are always meant to be multiplied. Picture the woman dropping her jar, racing back to the town that once whispered about her failures. What happened next changed everything. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. John 4:39. The one who once hid now becomes a declarer of good news. The one once shunned now becomes the bridge over ancient divides. Now imagine the chain reaction rippling out from her courage. One voice grows to two, two to 10, 10 to hundreds, as stories intertwine. He told me all that I ever did. The town's skepticism slowly gives way to curiosity, then hope, then living faith. The unlikely leader's simple invitation, "Come see a man," becomes the heartbeat of spiritual community, an openness not just to what Jesus is for me, but what he can become in us. But what does this mean for us in an age defined by isolation and fractured communities? You might be wondering, can real faith still unite people above their divisions, backgrounds, politics, failures, dreams? Is it possible for a spiritual encounter to overflow from one heart into many, creating not competition but connection, not suspicion but solidarity? Let's feel the possibilities. In modern neighborhoods and distant villages alike, the pattern repeats. Consider a small group of women drawn together in a quiet suburban home. One, brave enough to speak shame out loud, shares her story of desperation and hope. Heads nod, eyes fill, and suddenly what kept her lonely becomes the bridge of empathy for others. A Bible study becomes a sanctuary, and faith, once whispered, becomes the current, drawing people toward Jesus together. Or picture a recovery group gathered in a circle of mismatched chairs in a city church basement. As one shares how God's living water met them at their personal well, another finds words for their own thirst. The well digger in one life becomes the excavator for another. Newcomers are welcomed not as patients, but as kin, living proof of grace's contagious power. What's happening here? The same rhythm as in Samaria. Testimony begets testimony. Healing in one heart calls forth wounds in another to be cleansed and filled. Living water is never a private stash, but a surge, turning single stories into communal reservoirs. Pause and see the paradox. Many believe deeper spirituality means withdrawing from the mess of human relationships. But the profound truth is, every authentic encounter with Jesus ripples outward, creating a web of belonging, forgiveness, and celebration. The proof of living water is not just personal peace, but the unexpected bonds it forges between unlikely people. This shows us something profound about the nature of God's kingdom. It is built not by monologues, but by shared experience. The well is no longer a site of shame, but the center of communal joy. They said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world." John 4:42. Notice the flow. Her story invited them. Their own encounter with Jesus sealed the truth. This is the pattern for every enduring faith community. Courageous vulnerability opens the door, but shared, ongoing encounter cements genuine unity. Now imagine the vibrant, tangible expression of this truth in communities across the world. A group of families gather for a meal, sharing not only food, but hard-won stories of answered prayers and midnight doubts. The table becomes a living well. In the aftermath of disaster, strangers form a human chain to pass water, bread, and hope. Each gesture a ripple of God's compassion, awakening fresh channels in the desert of grief. A congregation of once divided backgrounds worships side by side, discovering that grace runs deeper than language or politics. What separated now connects. What was arid blooms. This expansion is not accidental, it's contagious by design. The Spirit seeks to turn wells into rivers. Each testimony, each gesture of humble honesty becomes an overflow valve through which God's love floods the world. You might feel a pang of longing. Could my story, my pain and healing become a catalyst for someone else's thirst to be quenched? The answer, hidden in Samaria, is a resounding yes. Community and shared faith begin in one honest encounter, but flourish in the persistent exchange of grace. Where one has dropped her jar, many may soon lay theirs aside. But don't miss the cost. To move from isolated encounter to shared well requires risk. The woman risked reputation, comfort, and safety to speak. The villagers risked disappointment and vulnerability to come and see for themselves. The river of living water flows most powerfully where jars and masks are dropped, where hearts are willing to be seen and souls brave enough to welcome others into the flow. Here's a question worth lingering over. What if your next step toward spiritual community is as small and as monumental as admitting your thirst to a friend, inviting someone to your table, or asking, "Will you meet me at the well?" What if the Spirit is already preparing a shared story far greater than you've imagined, waiting for you to risk the invitation? This shows us something transformative about faith. The greatest miracles happen not in solitary splendor, but in the messy, radiant bonds of shared lives. Living water is known only fully when tasted together. But if this ripple of community holds such promise, there's a deeper layer still, one that turns every shared well into a story of personal transformation. If faith becomes real in relationship, then how might your journey, your own living water encounter, continue to shape and be shaped by others long after the first drop touched your lips? In the next part, you'll be invited to look into the mirror of your own story, to witness the personal transformations born at the well, and to see how those moments echo and multiply outward, one life at a time. Don't miss it, because the final and most intimate circle of this living water is about to be revealed, and it just might awaken depths in you that you never dared dream were possible. Now the story brings us full circle, back to the edge of the ancient well, but this time it's not just history unfolding, it is your story, your reflection shimmering in the water, making you wonder, what if this divine encounter is not distant or reserved for the holy, but waiting here, right now, at the very place of your own thirst? Have you ever paused to ask, if Jesus met me by my well, what would he say? And who might I become? The truth that vibrates through the Gospel's pages is this: every encounter with living water is, at its core, a story of transformation, quiet, personal, and yes, often deeply hidden from public view. Many believe that spiritual change is measured in grand gestures or dramatic turnarounds, but the profound truth is, the deepest miracles happen in the secret, trembling moments where an honest soul meets God face to face. Imagine the woman after the crowd disperses, sitting quietly beside the well's rim, feeling the echo of her own breath. The jar she once clung to is left behind, but something new fills her. An inner river, silent but unstoppable. Her identity, once chiseled by failure and public shame, is now being rewritten name by name in the gentle script of grace. You might be wondering, could something this dramatic ever happen to me? Could living water actually change the story I tell myself about my worth, my past, my place in this world? Let's step into the frame. Personal transformation often begins not with a shout, but with a whisper, a sacred recognition of your own thirst. John 4:13-14 rings out like a promise offered directly to you. Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Pause. and let those words sink in. Many have read them, but few have risked believing that spiritual satisfaction could really well up from within, free from shame, not tied to achievement, ever flowing even when circumstances run dry. Consider the story of Aaron, a man whose life was defined by relentless striving. Success, accolades, possessions, all his jars lined up in a row, yet never enough. In the solitude following a crushing failure, Aaron finally admitted his thirst. Through a chance invitation to a quiet church prayer meeting, he heard the story of the Samaritan woman, and something inside broke. For the first time, he simply said, "God, I am thirsty. I need your living water." In that vulnerable silence, no preacher's voice, no thunder, he felt a peace settle, not around him, but within. Over time, his priorities shifted, fears loosened, relationships healed. The spring within revived every part of him, drop by drop. Or imagine Leah, lost in the storm of depression, feeling invisible among even her closest friends. She stumbled across John 4 while searching for relief online. Reading the woman's story, her repeated rejection, her quiet perseverance, Leah broke into tears. There, on her bedroom floor, she dared to whisper her brokenness to God. She described it as being seen for the first time. In the weeks that followed, subtle hope began to grow. Colors. Brightened laughter returned, and a deep assurance of God's personal love took root. Her daily struggle wasn't erased, but it was now shared. Her well had become a sanctuary, a place to meet Jesus again and again. This shows us something profound. The deepest transformations come not at the mountaintop, but at the wellspring of personal encounter. Living water is less about escaping life's desert than discovering a well that endures, even in sorrow, chaos, or doubt. But notice the pattern. After meeting Jesus, both Aaron and Leah couldn't keep their stories inside. Aaron reached out to colleagues facing burnout, offering a listening ear shaped by his own pain. Leah began volunteering at a local shelter, comforting those struggling with loneliness and mental health. Their stories, like the Samaritan woman's, became invitations, not proclamations of perfection, but living testimonies to the power of being. Known, loved, and changed. There's a holy pattern here, a rhythm of receiving and releasing. Each time you risk honesty with God, "I have no husband, I am thirsty, I need you," you create space for transformation. Each time you trust that your story, however unfinished, however ordinary, could be a lifeline for someone else, you let the living water ripple outward, turning wounds into fresh beginnings. You might be wondering, what if I'm still waiting for my own breakthrough, still circling the well with questions and confusion? The story of the woman at the well offers hope. Jesus meets you precisely there, at the threshold of confusion, in the middle of longing. The living water is not earned, it is received. The invitation is not to be perfect, but present. Your scars and scars are not your disqualification. They are the very entry points for God's mercy. Take a moment. Imagine yourself sitting beside that ancient well. The air is thick with silence, with mystery. Hear Jesus' words as if spoken directly to your heart. If you knew the gift of God, you would ask, and He would have given you living water. John 4:10. What do you want to ask? What wounds ache for healing? What shame needs washing? What hope needs rekindling? There may not be thunder or brilliant light. Instead, look for the subtle arrival of peace, the surprising courage to forgive, the unexpected welling up of joy or purpose in the ordinary. Spiritual transformation often dawns like sunrise, gradual, persistent, certain, until suddenly you see the world and yourself in new light. This shows us something liberating. Your story does not need to end in scarcity or shame. The same Jesus who sat at the well, who saw and loved the woman as she was, sees and loves you now. He calls you not to live defined by your emptiness, but to discover what happens when you allow living water to flow in and through you every single day. But let a final question remain. What will you choose now that you have tasted even a drop of this living water? Will you return to old wells, carrying the same jars of secrecy and self-doubt? Or will you walk forward, jarless, bold, drawing others to your own encounter, letting your wounds and wonder invite others to drink? Because this is not just the end of her story, it's an open gate to yours. The well is open, living water flows, and the invitation stands. Will you dare to ask, to drink, to share, and to be changed? What happens next in your life and in those you touch is a story yet unwritten. If you stay at the well, if you keep seeking the living water, you may discover, one day soon, that your own encounter has become the river someone else runs to, desperate for hope, longing for life, waiting unknowingly for you to share what you have found. The world is thirsty. The well is here. The story continues. Will you step in and let the journey of living water begin? You've journeyed with me from the sun-scorched stones of Jacob's well, through the searching questions of a hurting soul, to the eruption of living water that has flowed from one anonymous outcast down through centuries, right up to the edge of your own life. Now let's pause and recognize what has truly happened. You have traced the entire journey of the woman at the well, not just as an observer, but as a participant. Every lesson unfolded, every barrier broken, every drop of transformation has been, in some quiet way, extended as an invitation to you. Now we can clearly see that the story of the woman at the well isn't simply about a long-ago encounter. It is the divine pattern for how God meets every thirsty soul in every generation. Her journey from isolation to belonging, from shame to testimony, from an empty jar to overflowing life, this is the shape of God's redemption for each of us. When we bring all these truths together, a final dazzling perspective emerges. The well was never just about water or about one woman. The living water she received there was the beginning of a new reality, the proof that grace is deeper than our shame, that hope can interrupt despair, and that a single encounter with Jesus can ignite a movement that echoes through time. There is something breathtaking here, something that demands our full attention. Jesus, in choosing her, the Samaritan, the outcast, the weary, chose all of us who thought God's embrace was for someone else. Many live believing their wounds and failures put them beyond mercy's reach, but you are invited to see yourself not as the world sees you, but as the one Jesus seeks amid the noonday blaze. What a contrast! While the world values pedigree and perfection, Jesus starts revival in the raw honesty of broken lives. He meets us at our wells, those hidden places of longing we try to keep secret, and offers not just relief, but complete renewal. Take a breath and let this moment sink to the deepest part of your story. Imagine finally seeing the entire divine tapestry, the tangled threads of your shame, the bright promises yet fulfilled, the slow weaving of loss and longing, all reframed by a God who sits beside you, thirsts alongside you, and offers what the world can't give. The living water is not a maybe, not a someday, but a present, pulsing invitation. From the well in Samaria comes the declaration, your story matters, your healing is possible, you are not forgotten. I want you to feel this emotional crescendo, because the climax of this story isn't just for the woman, for Samaria, or for the ancient church. It is bursting forth in this very moment, in the possibility that you, yes, you, are being invited to a new kind of life. Think about the universality of this truth. All over the world, thirsty hearts bend low over modern wells, of expectation, approval, ambition, or regret, hoping for a drop of satisfaction. In a desert of hurry and comparison, Yet the message of John 4 cuts through every century. If you knew the gift of God. And here's the vision. Your pain is not wasted, nor your past proof of God's absence. Instead, it becomes the opening where living water flows. I will never forget the story of Maya, who after years of feeling invisible in her marriage and family, dared to risk letting Jesus see her as she was, not as she wished to be. She sat alone, Bible open on her kitchen table, and simply asked, "Could you really give me this living water?" Over time, instead of bitterness growing in her heart, a spring of tenderness, patience, and hope began to well up, changing her, then slowly, quietly, changing her loved ones too. Her old jar was left behind. A new season of overflow was born. Imagine how your life would change if you too left your jar behind. If you moved from hiding your need to sharing your story, if you let the living water fill the ordinary spaces of your days. You are invited right now into 3 simple yet profound steps on this spiritual journey. First, pause and ask Jesus honestly for the living water. No matter how raw, doubtful, or dry you may feel, your honesty is the gateway to transformation. Second, dare to tell your story to someone else. Like that woman, let come and see become the bridge from your private healing to the beginning of a community movement. Shame dies when stories are shared. Third, become a bearer of living water. In your family, work, friendships, look for parched hearts and offer what you have received. A word of kindness, an act of compassion, a listening ear. These too are streams in the desert. When you begin to practice these steps, you will sense God's presence welling up in unlikely moments, bringing comfort where there was pain, connection where there was isolation, and purpose where there was confusion. When you drink deeply, you overflow, and your overflow becomes someone else's invitation. You are not alone in this. We are called into a movement, not a monument, a living fellowship of those who know what it means to be thirsty and to be filled. As a community, our call is to become, like that Samaritan town, a living story of what God's presence can accomplish among ordinary thirsty people. Let me ask you, where is your well? What is the deepest thirst of your heart right now? How has God already met you in places of secret longing or shame? And what has changed in you because of it? I invite you to share your reflections in the comments. Describe your well, your longing, your story of transformation. When you share, you make the living water visible to others, and you become a catalyst in someone else's journey. If this story has moved you, consider sharing the video with someone in need of hope, or reaching out to those who, like the woman, believe they must travel alone at noon. And don't miss what's ahead. In the coming episodes, we'll uncover even more astonishing little-seen encounters between Jesus and everyday people, stories that will deepen your experience of grace and invite you into a stream of living water that cannot be stopped. If you've felt parched, isolated, or on the outside of faith, you'll find in the next teachings practical wisdom, honest community, and even greater revelations of God's extravagant pursuit. But before you leave, let your soul absorb this final declaration, a truth that echoes through every empty jar and every surging spring. Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. John 4:14. Everyone else may define you by your jars, your shame, your scars, but Jesus defines you by your thirst, your courage to ask, and the living water he delights to pour out. Many keep drawing from empty wells, but you are invited to drink deeply, to overflow, to become a vessel of the river that never runs dry. Let the silence rest a moment. Feel it, the possibility, the hope, the surge of newness waiting inside your daily places. The well is here. The water is living. The invitation is yours. Will you drink?